A school teacher, a Navy officer, 100-liter drum of concrete, and a murder so twisted, even Netflix wouldn't write it. This didn't happen in a horror film. It happened in a quiet neighborhood in Meerut, India, and the smell is what gave them away. Saurabh Rajput was a 35-year-old former merchant Navy officer. In 2016, he married Muskaan Rastogi, a schoolteacher, despite strong opposition from both families. Their relationship was seen as a love marriage, one that defied tradition. Friends and neighbors described Saurabh as calm, disciplined, and hardworking. He had spent years at sea and returned to settle down, hoping to build a stable home with his wife. Muskaan was 27 at the time of their marriage. She was educated, soft-spoken, and worked as a teacher at a private school in Meerut. To the outside world, they were a typical middle-class Indian couple raising their daughter, paying rent on their modest home, and going about their lives without drama. But behind closed doors, things were not as perfect as they seemed. By 2024, their marriage had begun to show signs of strain. According to reports, arguments had become more frequent. Saurabh's time at home after years of traveling with the Navy didn't bring them closer. It created distance. He noticed changes in Muskaan's behavior: long hours on her phone, secretive texts, emotional withdrawal. He didn't know it yet, but his wife was rekindling a relationship from her past, a man named Sahil Shukla, her old college flame. What started as a few messages on social media would soon spiral into something far more dangerous than infidelity. Because Muskaan wasn't just falling in love again, she was planning a way out. And for that plan to work, Saurabh had to disappear. In 2019, Muskaan Rastogi reconnected with Sahil Shukla, a former college friend and past love interest. Their contact was reignited through a school WhatsApp group where old classmates had started casually sharing updates and memories. Initially, the exchanges between Muskaan and Sahil were light, catching up on life, jobs, family. But over time, those casual conversations became more frequent and more private. Muskaan and Sahil began messaging directly, moving from group chats to one-on-one WhatsApp conversations, then to Instagram DMs. Within months, they were talking daily, sometimes late into the night. Their chats, at first friendly, soon became emotionally charged. They started reminiscing about their college days, about what could have been, about how unhappy Muskaan felt in her marriage. By 2023, Muskaan was mentally checked out of her life with Saurabh. She had grown cold at home, withdrawn, often distracted. She would spend long hours on her phone, often smiling at texts she wouldn't explain. Saurabh, by then fully grounded after his time in the merchant navy, sensed the growing distance. But he reportedly didn't suspect an affair. He thought maybe the stress of work or parenting had taken its toll. In truth, Muskaan was already emotionally invested elsewhere and building a connection strong enough to lead to betrayal. What neither Saurabh nor anyone else realized was just how far she and Sahil were willing to go to be together. By late 2023, the relationship between Muskaan Rastogi and Sahil Shukla had evolved into a full-blown affair. What began as innocent chats had turned into secret messages, private phone calls, and carefully planned in-person meetings. Their emotional intimacy deepened, quickly fueled by nostalgia, desire, and the thrill of secrecy. Muskaan had grown distant at home. She barely spoke to her husband Saurabh. Conversations became arguments. Affection turned into silence. Saurabh, once the center of her world, had become a background figure in her daily routine. She was physically present, but mentally checked out. Sahil, meanwhile, became the emotional anchor she clung to. He told her he still loved her, that they belonged together, that they deserved a second chance. And slowly, the idea of a new life together took root. But that life didn't include Saurabh. According to police reports later recovered from their phones, the two didn't just fantasize about being together. They began discussing how to remove the one thing standing in their way. Muskaan allegedly floated the idea first casually, hypothetically, but the more they talked, the more real it became. This wasn't just cheating anymore, this was planning. And it wouldn't be long before that obsession turned into action. On March 4th, 2025, Saurabh Rajput returned home to celebrate his wife Muskaan's birthday. He brought sweets and gifts, believing he was spending a quiet evening with his family. What he didn't know was that Muskaan and her lover Sahil Shukla had been planning his murder for weeks. This wasn't an act of rage. It was a premeditated decision. That night, Muskaan slipped sedatives into Saurabh's food. Within minutes, he became drowsy and collapsed. Once he was unconscious, she called Sahil. He entered the house through a pre-arranged route. Together, they killed him in the bedroom using knives. It was brutal, but according to investigators, methodical. There were no signs of panic, no evidence of hesitation. After the murder, they began dismembering his body. They cut Saurabh into approximately 15 pieces, wrapping each in plastic. Then they placed the remains into a large blue plastic drum. To seal away the smell and destroy any trace, they filled the drum with quick-drying cement. The drum was then moved to a rented apartment in Indira Nagar, just a few kilometers from their home. It was hidden in a locked room. No one knew it was there. In the days that followed, Muskaan returned to her job as a teacher. Sahil went back to his routine. To outsiders, nothing seemed unusual. But the secret they were hiding would not stay buried for long. At first, no one suspected anything unusual. Saurabh's sudden disappearance was explained away by Muskaan with vague excuses. She told neighbors and family he had left for work or was away sorting out personal matters. But the truth was beginning to seep through the cracks, literally. Within days of the murder, residents of the apartment complex in Indira Nagar, where the cement-filled drum had been stored, began to complain about a powerful, rotting stench coming from one of the locked flats. The smell was unbearable. It clung to the stairwell. It seeped through the walls. The apartment in question had been rented under a false name, with rent paid in cash. The landlord, unable to contact the tenant and pressured by neighbors, finally alerted the police. When officers arrived and forced open the door, they found the blue plastic drum in a corner of the room. It looked ordinary, sealed, heavy, and coated in dried cement, but the smell was overwhelming. Suspecting something far worse than a sanitation issue, the police brought in forensic experts. They broke open the drum. What they found inside wasn't just a body, it was a body in pieces, preserved in layers of cement and plastic. The scene was so disturbing that officers on the scene reportedly had to step outside to compose themselves. Identification of the remains didn't take long. It was Saurabh Rajput. His body had been hidden in plain sight, but the smell, the one thing they couldn't control, gave everything away. The decision to hide Saurabh Rajput's body in a drum wasn't spontaneous. It was part of a calculated plan that Muskaan Rastogi and Sahil Shukla had allegedly crafted over time, a plan that mimicked scenes straight out of a crime thriller. After the murder, they didn't flee or panic. Instead, they got to work. They bought a 100-liter blue plastic drum, the kind typically used for storing water or chemicals. They also purchased several bags of quick-drying cement, known for sealing odors and making detection harder. The intention wasn't just to hide the body. It was to preserve it in a way that delayed discovery for as long as possible. In the hours after the murder, they carefully dismembered Saurabh's body into approximately 15 pieces. Each part was wrapped in plastic sheets, layered one over the other, and placed inside the drum. Once all the pieces were inside, they began pouring cement layer by layer until the entire drum was filled to the brim. When the cement hardened, it formed a solid tomb-like structure. No blood, no odor, at least not at first. They cleaned the surrounding area and then transported the drum to a rented apartment in Indira Nagar, just a few kilometers from Muskaan's home. The lease was in a different name, and the rent was paid upfront in cash to avoid suspicion. They locked the flat and left the scene thinking they had buried the evidence. But what they didn't account for was decomposition gases building up under the sealed cement. Within days, the airtight seal began to leak. The heat accelerated the decay. The smell became unbearable. Their perfect cover-up started to fall apart. The moment the police entered the apartment in Indira Nagar, they knew something was wrong. The room was nearly empty, bare walls, no furniture. Just a blue plastic drum sealed shut and surrounded by flies. The stench inside was overpowering. Even seasoned officers hesitated. This wasn't just a sanitation issue, it was something far more sinister. The drum was tightly sealed with a plastic lid, secured with industrial-grade adhesive. The surface of the cement inside had hardened completely, forming a thick, pale crust. The officers called in forensic experts and crime scene investigators, who began the process of breaking it open. With hammers and chisels, they chipped away at the hardened cement. Layer by layer, they uncovered plastic wrappings embedded in the concrete. Inside those layers were body parts wrapped, compressed, and discolored from decomposition. The body had been dismembered with precision. Each piece was separately encased. It took hours to extract the full remains. Forensics later confirmed it was Saurabh Rajput. There were stab wounds on the torso and limbs, and the condition of the remains showed that the dismemberment was not chaotic, it had been methodical. There were no signs of blunt force trauma, no defensive wounds supporting the theory that he was unconscious when the attack began. The officers at the scene were visibly shaken. Some reportedly stepped outside to catch their breath. It wasn't just the gruesomeness of the act, it was the cold, structured way it had been done. By the time the last layer of concrete was removed, the police knew they weren't dealing with a crime of passion. They were looking at a blueprint for murder. Once the remains were fully recovered from the cement drum, the next step was identification. While the police already suspected who the victim was, they needed confirmation, scientific, irrefutable proof. The body, though decomposed, still retained enough soft tissue for DNA sampling. Investigators collected samples and rushed them to the forensic lab. In parallel, they compared dental records and physical identifiers provided by Saurabh Rajput's family. It didn't take long. Within 48 hours, the results came back. The remains inside the drum were positively identified as those of Saurabh Rajput. When officers informed the family, the reaction was one of devastation and disbelief. Saurabh's mother reportedly collapsed upon hearing the news. Friends and relatives who had hoped he might still be alive, kidnapped, perhaps were now faced with a gruesome truth. Worse yet was the emerging reality of who was responsible. The investigation had already revealed that the apartment where the drum was found had been rented using a false identity. But when the phone numbers linked to the lease were traced, they led directly to Muskaan Rastogi and Sahil Shukla. Muskaan, his wife; Sahil, her secret lover. The betrayal hit harder than the murder itself. People in their community were stunned. Muskaan had continued going to school, teaching children, attending family functions, all while hiding this dark secret. Neighbors described her as quiet, reserved, polite. No one could have imagined she was capable of such a thing. But now the mask had cracked, and the shock was only beginning. After identifying the remains of Saurabh Rajput, police turned their focus to the two names now tied to the rented apartment, Muskaan Rastogi and Sahil Shukla. Muskaan was brought in for questioning first. At the station, she appeared composed. cold even. But as the interrogation deepened and as the officers presented her with phone records, rental agreements, and the overwhelming forensic evidence, her facade began to crumble. For over 6 hours, she denied everything. She said she didn't know where her husband was, claimed she hadn't seen him in days. But when officers revealed that they had recovered the body and had evidence tying her directly to the rented flat, something shifted. Muskaan broke down. In a detailed confession, she admitted to drugging Saurabh, allowing Sahil into the house, and helping him commit the murder. She described how they had wrapped the body, filled the drum with cement, and stashed it in the flat in Indira Nagar. She claimed the entire plan had been Sahil's idea, but investigators were skeptical. Text messages recovered from her phone told a different story. Muskaan had been involved from the beginning. She had helped rent the apartment. She had searched for sleeping pills online. She had suggested the cement. Shortly after Muskaan's confession, Sahil Shukla was picked up from his residence. At first, he denied any connection. But faced with Muskaan's signed statement and the digital trail of messages between them, he too confessed. Both gave matching timelines. Both blamed each other for the murder, but neither denied being there. Muskaan's cold composure during her initial questioning and the calculated details she gave during her confession left even seasoned investigators disturbed. This wasn't a crime of impulse. This was a crime of planning, precision, and betrayal. After Muskaan Rastogi's confession, police wasted no time tracking down Sahil Shukla. He was arrested from his family home without resistance. At the time of his arrest, Sahil appeared calm, but his phone had already been seized, and with it a digital trail the investigators had been following for days. At the station, Sahil initially denied everything. He claimed he hadn't seen Muskaan in weeks. He said he had nothing to do with Saurabh's disappearance, but the police weren't bluffing. They had Muskaan's statement. They had screenshots of conversations, GPS data that placed him near the murder scene, transaction records showing joint purchases. It was over. After nearly 10 hours of questioning, Sahil confessed. He admitted to being at the crime scene on March 4th, 2025. He confirmed that Muskaan had drugged her husband and that he entered the house afterward. Together, they stabbed Saurabh in the bedroom. Sahil said it was Muskaan who first suggested cutting up the body. He claimed he hesitated but didn't stop her. He told investigators they had hoped the cement would seal in the smell long enough for them to get away, that they didn't know decomposition gases would eventually break through the drum. Like Muskaan, he tried to shift the blame. He portrayed himself as someone manipulated by love, dragged into something he couldn't control. But the evidence told a different story. Police had found that Sahil had searched for how to dispose of a body. He had helped rent the apartment. He had even messaged Muskaan days before the murder, saying, "Once he's gone, we'll be free." With both confessions in hand, investigators now had a complete picture of the crime, and it was uglier than anyone could have imagined. As police dug deeper into the digital records recovered from Muskaan and Sahil's phones, one chilling truth became clear. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment murder. It had been in the works for months. Investigators uncovered WhatsApp chats, deleted messages, and search history dating back to late 2023. That's when the tone of their relationship shifted from flirtation to conspiracy. In several recovered messages, Muskaan repeatedly expressed her frustration with her marriage. She told Sahil she felt trapped, that Saurabh didn't understand her, and that she wanted a new life. Initially, Sahil sympathized. Then, slowly, their conversations turned darker. They began exchanging ideas, hypotheticals. If he just disappeared, we could be together. There must be a way to make this happen. No one would know if it's done right. By early February 2025, they weren't just talking, they were planning. Search history on Sahil's device included terms like how to make someone unconscious without a trace, where to buy industrial cement in Meerut, how long does a body smell after death. On Muskaan's phone, investigators found lists, types of sedatives, drum prices, rented flat addresses. Police believe the pair scouted multiple rental locations before settling on the Indira Nagar apartment. The lease was signed in a false name and the payment was made in advance. Surveillance footage later confirmed both Muskaan and Sahil had visited the building together. This wasn't panic. This was strategy. They bought tools, gloves, tape, and cleaning chemicals. They even scheduled the murder for a specific date, Muskaan's birthday, to give her a cover story for Saurabh's whereabouts. Every step was deliberate, and every step showed that the murder wasn't driven by emotion in the heat of the moment. It was planned like a project. When the story of the cement drum murder broke across Indian news outlets in April 2025, the country was stunned. It wasn't just the brutality of the crime that shocked people, it was the cold, calculated nature of it. A schoolteacher and her lover, planning for months to kill her husband, dismember his body, and hide him in concrete. It sounded like a crime thriller, but it was very real. Within hours, the story trended on Indian social media platforms. Hashtags like #CementMurder, #MeerutCrime, and #JusticeForSarabh flooded Twitter and Instagram. News channels ran continuous coverage. Talk shows debated every angle from the rise of relationship-based murders to the role of digital communication in fueling extramarital affairs. Psychologists were invited onto national TV to discuss the mental state of the accused. Former cops dissected the forensic handling of the case. Public anger was intense. Muskaan Rastogi, once seen as a quiet, educated woman, was now being portrayed as a black widow figure in headlines. Sahil Shukla was painted as a manipulative accomplice or a weak-willed follower depending on who you asked. But in every version of the story, the focus remained on the terrifying betrayal of trust. Locally in Meerut, there was a sense of horror among those who knew the couple. Neighbors, teachers, even students at the school where Muskaan taught were stunned. One former colleague said, "She was always soft-spoken. We had no idea she was capable of this." The shock reached even those who had never met the family. Because this wasn't just a murder story, it was a story about someone living a double life. A wife, a mother, a teacher, and a killer. And for many watching from their screens, that was the part that terrified them the most. As investigators and media continued to dissect the cement drum murder, one central question emerged again and again. Was this really about love? On the surface, it looked like a classic crime of passion, two lovers desperate to be together, eliminating the obstacle in their way. But when the police examined the messages between Muskaan and Sahil, it became clear this wasn't just about romance. It was about control, manipulation, and a mutual descent into darkness. Muskaan, in her confession, portrayed herself as emotionally trapped. She claimed Saurabh was controlling, distant, and difficult to live with. She told Sahil that he was the only one who understood her. But these were words spoken in private texts, never corroborated by family or neighbors. On the other hand, Sahil painted himself as a victim of Muskaan's influence. He told police that he never wanted to kill anyone, and that Muskaan convinced him they had no choice. Yet the digital evidence contradicted this. Sahil had searched for body disposal methods, bought the cement, and actively helped rent the apartment. Psychologists interviewed by the media pointed to what's known as folie à deux, a rare psychological phenomenon where two people feed each other's delusions to the point of criminal behavior. In other words, they might not have done this alone, but together they lost all sense of morality. Was it obsession? Was it toxic codependency? Was it a fantasy they couldn't escape? Whatever it was, one thing became clear. This wasn't a story of love. It was a story of two people who convinced themselves that murder was their only way forward. And in doing so, they destroyed not only Saurabh's life, but their own. By early May 2025, the case of Saurabh Rajput's murder had moved from headlines to the courtroom. With both Muskaan Rastogi and Sahil Shukla in police custody, formal charges were filed under Indian Penal Code sections related to murder, criminal conspiracy, destruction of evidence, and concealment of a corpse. Neither Muskaan nor Sahil was granted bail. In the courtroom, the public and media presence was intense. Reporters crowded outside the Meerut district court, cameras flashing as the accused were brought in under heavy police security. Family members of the victim sat silently, refusing to look at Muskaan. Inside, the prosecution laid out the timeline of events using GPS data, chat logs, receipts, and confessions. Their case was simple and strong. This was a premeditated joint murder. The cement drum, the rented flat, the sedatives, it was all part of a plan. Muskaan's defense team hinted at emotional abuse within the marriage and tried to shift more blame onto Sahil. Sahil's lawyers, in turn, claimed that he was emotionally manipulated by Muskaan and acted under her influence. But with matching confessions and overwhelming forensic evidence, legal experts have already called it an open and shut case. The trial is ongoing. A formal verdict is expected later this year. If convicted, both could face life imprisonment under Section 302 of the APC. Some commentators speculate the prosecution may even push for the death penalty, though that remains uncertain. Meanwhile, public interest in the trial remains high. Every new hearing is covered by national media. Court sketches are circulated. Excerpts from confessions are read aloud on news panels. Justice is in motion. But for Saurabh's family, no sentence will undo the betrayal or bring him back. The apartment in Indira Nagar, where Saurabh Rajput's body was hidden, quickly became a place of horror, not just for the police, but for the community that lived around it. Rented under a fake identity and paid for in cash, the flat had been sitting mostly vacant, with its single deadly occupant sealed inside a blue plastic drum filled with cement. After the police uncovered the remains, the unit was declared a biohazard scene. Forensic teams spent several days removing evidence, scraping cement residue off the floor, and collecting samples from every corner. The stench of decomposition had soaked into the walls. Neighbors who lived on the same floor reported being unable to sleep for days. Some even chose to temporarily move out, especially families with children. Local rumors spread quickly. Some claimed the building was cursed. Others said they had heard strange sounds at night, even though no one had entered the flat for weeks. The landlord, who had unknowingly rented the apartment to the couple, cooperated fully with police. He later told the press, "I never imagined something so evil could happen here. I feel ashamed, even though I did nothing wrong." As of May 2025, the apartment remains locked and sealed by court order. A faded police tape still stretches across the front door. No tenant has moved in, and the building's management is considering gutting and renovating the entire unit, if not keeping it permanently vacant. For many in the neighborhood, the flat has become more than just a crime scene. It's a symbol of betrayal, of violence hiding behind ordinary walls. A reminder that the worst things don't always happen in the dark, they sometimes happen right next door. No courtroom testimony, no legal sentence, no public outrage could compare to the devastation felt by Saurabh Rajput's family. His parents, already aging, were the ones who filed the missing person report when Muskaan claimed she hadn't seen her husband in days. For a while, they held on to hope that maybe he had been kidnapped, maybe he had run away. But when the news broke about the cement drum and the body found inside, that hope collapsed. Saurabh's mother reportedly fainted upon receiving confirmation that it was her son. At his family's home in Meerut, mourners gathered in silence. No one could find the right words. His father, speaking to local media through tears, said, "She was like our daughter. We gave her everything, and she killed our son like an animal." The pain wasn't just in the murder, it was in the betrayal. Muskaan had lived in their home, shared meals, held their hands, and then plotted to erase Saurabh from existence. Friends of the family remember Saurabh as kind and quiet, a man who worked hard at sea and came home only to be destroyed by the people he trusted most. Even his young daughter, too small to understand what had happened, now asks where her father has gone. The family held no traditional funeral. There was no body to display, no peaceful farewell. What they had was a set of remains pulled from concrete and a lifetime of unanswered questions. The grief has since turned to anger. Saurabh's family is now demanding the harshest punishment allowed under Indian law: life imprisonment or even capital punishment. They want justice not just for their son, but to make sure no other family suffers like they have. And every court date, every news update, every photo of Muskaan in handcuffs is another twist of the knife. While national media quickly picked up the story of Saurabh Rajput's murder once the body was discovered, much of what led up to that moment flew under the radar for weeks. The truth is, this case nearly went unnoticed. When Saurabh first disappeared, there was no immediate outcry. Muskaan told friends and relatives that he had traveled out of town for work. She even showed up to her job at school like nothing had happened. For over a week, no one suspected a thing. The missing persons report filed by Saurabh's parents wasn't treated as urgent at first. Police logged the case, but with no signs of struggle and a vague statement from the wife, there was little momentum behind the search. What changed everything wasn't a dramatic breakthrough or tip from a witness. It was the smell. A foul, putrid odor coming from a locked flat. Complaints from neighbors. A landlord who, after several calls, finally unlocked the door. Inside, what officers found wasn't just evidence of a murder, it was evidence of a cover-up that could have worked. If that drum hadn't begun to leak, if the neighbors had stayed silent, if the landlord hadn't acted when he did, this case might still be unsolved. There were no security cameras showing the murder, no fingerprints left behind, no loud noises, no blood on the streets. Just a rented apartment, a sealed barrel, and two people who thought they had gotten away with it. What you didn't hear on the news was how close this came to being a perfect crime, and how the smallest detail, the thing they thought wouldn't matter, was the one that brought everything crashing down. It's easy to look at a case like this and think, I'd never fall for that. I'd know if someone I loved was planning something. But would you? Saurabh Rajput lived under the same roof as the woman who ultimately helped take his life. He shared meals with her, slept beside her, trusted her. He had no idea she was plotting his murder with another man through late-night texts, secret meetings, and a plan so calculated it could have worked. Friends say he noticed she'd become distant. She was on her phone more. She avoided conversations. She seemed cold. But in a marriage, people chalk that up to stress, to routine, to growing apart. He never imagined it meant she wanted him gone. And that's the haunting part. Because for many watching, this isn't just a story about murder. It's a story about the quiet collapse of trust. About how evil doesn't always scream, it whispers, it smiles, it hides in plain sight. So ask yourself, Would you know? Would you see the signs? Or would you be like Saurabh, living with someone who was planning to erase you from existence, while still kissing you goodnight? As of May 2025, both Muskaan Rastogi and Sahil Shukla remain in custody. The trial is ongoing in Meerut District Court, and legal experts believe a verdict could come within months. If convicted, they each face a possible life sentence under Section 302 of the Indian Penal Code. Some legal voices are even pushing for the death penalty, citing the sheer brutality and premeditation behind the crime. But even if justice is served in court, one truth remains. Saurabh Rajput is gone. A man who loved quietly, who worked hard, who trusted the wrong person with his life. His story isn't just about betrayal. It's about what happens when obsession overtakes morality, when love is weaponized and loyalty is replaced with lies. For Saurabh's family, there will be no peace, only the echo of what could have been. A son taken from them, a father stolen from his daughter, and the unthinkable fact that it was done not by a stranger, but by the woman he once called his wife. What happens next is for the courts to decide. But what happened already should never be forgotten. Now that you've heard the full story, I want to hear from you. Do you think Muskaan and Sahil should face life in prison or something harsher? Do you believe this was a crime of love, manipulation, or something even more twisted? Could anyone have seen this coming? Tell me in the comments. What would you have done if you were Saurabh or someone in his family? Would you have noticed the red flags? Or would you have missed them just like everyone else? Leave your thoughts below. Let's talk about the psychology, the justice system, and how crimes like this happen behind closed doors, hidden under layers of routine, silence, and concrete. And if this story made you feel something, hit the like button, share it with someone. Subscribe for more real stories that cut deep, because sometimes the darkest things happen in the most ordinary places, and they deserve to be remembered.